Alrighty then. Who feels like talking some smack tonight with Bob and Jack? Welcome everybody to another episode. I don't know what number it is. Jack keeps track of that sort of thing, but welcome to Talking Smack. I'm Bob.
And I'm Jack.
Yeah, what number is it, Jack? I asked you last time and I
I
forgot
think we're
what it was.
23 or 24,
I think it
somewhere in
was
that
20.
ballpark.
Yeah, now that you say it, I remembered. I think it was 23 before, so that makes it 24 now. All right, I can count. You see, I went to a private school. All right, we've got a big show lined up for you on this episode. Jack Windsor, who's going to join us here in a couple?
So tonight we have with us a guy you'll remember from the days of the hot and heavy COVID coverage, healthcare data scientist Brian Blackburn will be with us. And then later in the show, we'll have former GOP candidate for Congress, Jonah Schulz, who fell to Republican candidate who ended up winning the whole shooting match, Max Miller. We'll have Jonah with us to talk about what's up with him now and his new book coming out.
Yeah, he's got a new book. It's called Common Sense for a Dying Nation. It comes out in about 2 weeks. And yeah, it's a very good topic, in fact. And you know what I find? I think this is going to be a very similar conversation to the one we had with Vivek Ramaswamy last week or week before that. Couple episodes ago. Very similar themes. The only difference being Vivek is now running for president. And he made it official. He kind of told us that it was going to be official, sort of, when we had him on. Then a couple of days later, he did make it official. So we are going to talk about all of those things which ail this dying nation right now. That'll be with Jonah Schulz coming up in a while. And before we get into our first conversation with Brian Blackburn, Jack, you've got a story that you want to update us on that I know you have been working very hard on with the Ohio Press Network for a while now. I've been working on it almost to the extent that you give me information on it on the radio side on WHK Radio. For those who don't know, the radio program is from 9 to noon every day at WHKradio.com if you want to listen to it online, wherever you might be, or through our app. But, Jack, we've been talking about Ohio schools. We've been talking about indoctrination. We've been talking about all kinds of things that parents are excluded from. And in particular, one school district is very, very close to you and very personal to you, and that's the Olentangy School District. Why don't you give us what you got?
Yeah, so we published that groundbreaking article in the Ohio Press Network last year. It was titled, Are Ohio Schools Being Transparent with Parents and Taxpayers About Transgender Policies? And that story uncovered a common theme, proposed changes by the Biden administration to include gender ideology and sexual orientation in Title IX protections are being leaned on to permit biological boys to use girls' restrooms, to hide gender ideology and sexual conversations from parents that the schools and school personnel are having with students. Now, one of the many concerns that that have transpired since that story published, the first is that if a child refuses to participate, a typical student refuses to participate in somebody else's gender confusion, the concern is that that typical student would then be cited or, charged with, cited is probably a better word, gender harassment. And then the other concern is that even if a student has a deeply held religious conviction that prohibits that student from accepting the gender ideology policies of the school or calling a girl who wants to be a boy, the chosen gender instead of the biological gender, that those religious beliefs would be trumped. And so I obtained an email today from Jessica Philemon, and Jessica is an attorney at Scott Scriven. Scott Scriven is the law firm representing Olentangy Local School District. They also represent several schools around the state of Ohio. And the parents there are concerned that their religious liberties are not going to be honored in the school district. And so in this email, it reads, I'm responding to your email below on behalf of the district. As you are aware, the Olentangy Board of Education has adopted an anti-harassment policy that prohibits discrimination and harassment based on a student's sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity. While your children certainly maintain religious rights of freedom at school, those rights do not relieve them of the obligation to comply with board policy and the code of conduct. A student purposefully referring to another student by using gendered language they know is contrary to the other student's identity would be an example of discrimination under board policy. The board policy is intended to create a safe learning environment for all students.
Kiss my ass!
Discrimination. Yeah.
Jack, I've heard enough. I've heard enough.
Bob,
The
I chuckle
only
because it's a
people-
nervous chuckle because that's my daughter's school district, and I'm mad enough my head can go through the roof right
Well,
now.
I'm going to be mad enough for you. You probably can't say some of the things that I'm about to say. That's what I meant, of course, when I introduced this topic, saying it's very personal and very close to you. Olentangy Public School Board, kiss our collective asses. You people should never be in the same room. No, in the same no, on the same block as children. You have no idea what in the flying flip you're doing about any of them. I was writing down some of the things that you were saying, Jack. The only students being harassed in this instance are the normal students who refuse to give up and ignore basic biology. This has nothing to do with religious liberty. Telling a student they have to ignore basic biology and look at a girl that they've always known as a girl, little Cindy with her little pigtails, and have to call her George, kiss my royal red ruby ass. No, you cannot make them ignore biology. And if they want them to call this little kid, this little girl, or this little boy a they or a them or an XC or an MX or any of these other pieces of crap made up terms, that is also harassing the children. And what was it? If somebody engages in not playing the gender game, and it's a game, my friends, I've got news for you. Less than 1% of kids have gender dysphoria. And yet scores of them are coming out. They're going to gender counseling clinics as groups. You're telling me it's not a social contagion? You're telling me it's just actual gender dysphoria? A very, very exclusive and limited and teeny tiny percentage of people who have a dysfunction between what their mind says they are and what their body and their DNA and their genes and their chromosomes and every cell of their being says that they are. You're telling they all came to this discovery? I'm in the wrong body. Just at the same time, they're not subjecting or succumbing rather to peer pressure, and they're not succumbing to pressure from parents, from teachers, and from school boards like Olentangy, who have no business being near kids ever. You're child abusers. You are grooming them for a lifetime of misery. You are helping create lifelong dependence on medical care for every kid that you talk into starting some foolhardy transition. You are literally sentencing them to a lifetime. If you start them on hormone blockers, if you steer them toward physical mutilation of their bodies, they are going to have physical ailments and problems for their entire lives, not to mention the psychological problems and emotional problems they will have because the adults in their lives failed them when they were all hoodwinked by social media influencers and groomers like you people into adopting and going along with the trendy fad of this particular weird time in American history. The adults are the ones who are supposed to bring kids who are either being hooked into various things, whether they get hooked into drugs, whether they get hooked into or addicted into anything, the internet, social media, and so forth. The adults are supposed to bring them back to reality and bring them back from this weird lifestyle that they've started out to normalize them and help them realize you're going through a phase right now. You're being very easily influenced. You're in a formative time of your life. You're being influenced by other people. It's the adults who are supposed to do this for them. And when these kids ultimately realize they destroyed their bodies and their lives, which detransitioners are coming out all over the place now.
They're in droves. Yeah.
They're everywhere. And they're saying what? They're saying, Mom and Dad, where were you for me? Mom and Dad, so I was a tomboy. I like to play football with the boys instead of playing fairy princesses with the girls. You put me on puberty blockers and testosterone? What the hell are you doing? Why did you transition me? Why didn't you bring some sense to my life? There's a reason why children are not allowed to enter into legally binding contracts. You have to be 18 years old before you can do that. Why? Because the law recognizes a child under 18 is far, far too immature and irresponsible to make lifetime decisions like contracts. That's why kids under 18 aren't allowed to get tattoos. You can't alter your body forever and permanently with marks because you're too young to make a decision like that. And it's true, they are. And that's why the adults in their lives are failing these kids. The parents, the counselors, any doctors who participate, and yes, these school board members. They can
school
all
board
go
members
straight to freaking hell. As a matter of fact, that's not my order, that's my prediction. You are all, for what you're doing to these kids, going to end up in hell. I'm done.
I'm sorry I interrupted you there, Bob. Look,
Somebody
a
had
couple
to.
of things. I oftentimes will try to find another example because, when you get caught up in something emotional like this, and it's emotional for me because my kid is in elementary school. My kid is in this school district. Okay. And so it's easy to kind of, not see the forest through the trees. But I was thinking about this today. Imagine if, let's say that the Federal Aviation Commission, right? They have rules about pilots and sobriety and not being intoxicated. Let's imagine that a pilot is an alcoholic, is a chronic alcoholic, but instead of owning the fact that he is a chronic alcoholic, he decides to say, no, I am sober. And do you think the FAA would come out and say, hey, he's sober, and not only is he allowed to fly airplanes, but if you're going to be a passenger on that airline, you must acknowledge that this pilot is sober. If he slurs on the loudspeaker, we don't want to hear it because that is going to be harassing his sobriety. Okay. I mean, it's asinine. So what we're doing is we're saying that a child with gender dysphoria is a child that it doesn't appear is being treated for gender dysphoria. Instead, they're being encouraged to take puberty blockers and to basically have their bodies mutilated if they want to, or if their parents want to. But hold on.
Okay.
We'll bring this around the barn. But the point is that goes one step. The other step is if you don't acknowledge that student's, first of all, if you acknowledge that student's gender dysphoria, that's like in the other example saying, no, the pilot's a drunk. Well, no, that's a girl, or no, that's a boy. No, if you don't play along, then we're going to punish you. That's going to go on your record. And when you try to get into college, guess what? It's going to be right there on your transcript. You committed some act of gender harassment or sexual harassment. It is lunacy, Bob. It is absolute and utter lunacy. At what point do we throw a flag on it? I mean, why can't another kid go to school and say, you know what? I'm actually identifying today as the superintendent, and my 5 friends right here are identifying as members of the Board of Education, and we already had our meeting, and we're changing this rule. How can you logically argue against that? It's
it is. It's a great example, and I'm going to give you my quick analogy before you bring Brian in and change the subject entirely. The best example that I give and that I've heard and that I've read and that I've shared is the idea that a girl suffering from the horrific effects of anorexia and or bulimia, who literally looks in the mirror and in her eyes and in her head, she sees an overweight person. She's skin and bones. You can count the ribs on her rib cage. She throws up constantly every bite of food she takes because she's afraid she's getting fat. And in her mind, she really truly believes, I am fat. I have to do something. And she's constantly trying to lose weight. She's making herself sick, right? According to what Olentangy is doing here, the right thing to do would be to require every student around her to agree with her mental and psychological condition and tell her she's fat. You're right. If you think you're fat, you are fat. You should go and see a doctor and have surgery to deal with your condition. Your body is like so crazy overweight. So Samantha, you really need to go to schedule liposuction. And that is exactly what this is doing. Telling these, these kids that they have to do the same thing. And then, Jack, to really, you want to borrow your Blystone phrase and bring it around the barn. Bringing it around the barn would be going to that doctor And that doctor saying, yep, we'll do the surgery, and conducting like liposuction on this bony, skinny girl because her mind says she's fat, and he's not going to dispute her mind. He's going to do exactly what she wants to do with her body and make it even skinnier. That doctor, of course, would be doing harm. It would be a complete violation of the Hippocratic Oath. That doctor would be harming that child, but that doctor should be applauded because it's anorexic affirming care. Because that's exactly what happens when a doctor cuts off healthy organs like a young girl's breasts or a boy's penis, cuts off healthy organs, and then gets applauded for doing gender-affirming surgery to help this person's body match what it is in their mind. And if you're okay with doing that to skinny, bulimic, and anorexic girls, well, then I guess there's nothing else to say. That's all I've got, Jack.
Yeah, well, here's what I've got. I believe, if this is still correct, Dr. Stephen Lewis is the supervisor of equity and inclusion at Olentangy Local School District. So here's my invitation to you, Dr. Stephen Lewis. Why don't you join us right here on this podcast? And why don't you just give me, I just want 2 questions. That's all I'm asking. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, please get this to Mr. Stevens. And or is it Stevens or Lewis? I'm sorry. I'm so pissed off. I can't even think straight right now. It's Dr.
I don't know,
Lewis,
but when you,
Dr. Stephen Lewis.
Yeah, when you figure it out, if you're going to extend that invitation, make sure you edit out all of my kiss my asses because he's probably not going to want to come on with me.
Bob, you and I both know that he's going to reject that invitation. These folks love diversity, inclusion, and equity as long as you think like them, as long as you talk like them, and as long as you are an activist like them.
They're probably going to not like my prediction that they're going straight to hell as well. So it might be a little bit tough to schedule then. All right, Jack, let's change the subject. Let's lighten it up a little bit. A little bit only, though, because this is also rather infuriating, the subject we're going to talk about with our guest. Go ahead.
So you'll remember him from the hot and heavy days of covering Governor Mike DeWine's COVID pressers, what we so affectionately called ties, pies, and lies back in the day. He is data scientist Brian Blackburn. Brian has been a friend for several years now. In the days past, he would come on the very raw and rudimentary live sessions that I would do around my dining room table, and we would cuss and discuss the data and Mike DeWine's answers or lack of answers, if you will, to questions that oftentimes Brian helped me put together with fantastic data points and thoughts and interpretations of the data. So Brian Blackburn, welcome to Talkin' Smack with Bob and Jack. Good to see you again, brother.
Good to see you again, too. And we put the disclaimer. It's still data scientist.
Hey.
You can say whatever you
Brian,
want.
we're losing. Brian, you're kind of choppy.
Right?
Sorry.
Oh, I'm choppy.
Yeah. Can you, Bob? Are you having a challenge?
It's terribly. Yeah, I heard like every 4th syllable that he said.
Shit.
All I know is all I heard from him through that was that he's a Michigan fan. That's all I heard.
Let me try it. Let me take the headphones out and see if that works better.
Okay.
Is that any better?
We'll find out.
A little better. Healthcare data scientist Brian Blackburn. Did I hack that the first time, Brian?
No, you were fine. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yeah, there's a slight delay between your video and your audio.
Yeah. We see you, but we don't hear you, and then we hear you, and you've stopped your lips moving. So it's a little bit behind, but I think we can make do. We'll just have to adjust ourselves. And
yes,
if you see us going like this, and no sound is coming out, it's just us getting even. So
I can pause the video for just a second and try to fix it if you want me to.
Yeah,
we'll adjust. We'll adjust because the most important thing is wanting. Yeah, the most important thing we want is to hear from you, because I know that's why Jack wanted to schedule this thing with you, and so we're not going to worry too much about how the video matches up. Most people listen to podcasts rather than watching them anyway, so that's okay. Jack Windsor, you go first.
Yeah. So, Brian, you caught my attention again today. Just like in days of old, you shared on social media an article written by the New York Times that essentially says what I think you were saying 3 years ago. So just give us a recap of that article and why it caught your attention and what your thoughts were on it. Information released by the Department of Energy today, I believe.
Well, yeah, actually, so over the last couple of days,
you've had the FBI now, so the Department of so the administration is invoked in on the business of investigating. I'll put it in air quotes. Actually looking at trying to determine what was the source of the virus. We know multiple government agencies, including Dr. Fauci, was suppressing as much as they any type of orientation back to the Wuhan lab because department's direct investment gain of
Hey Brian, we're going to
Yeah.
have to jump in and try to reestablish a connection. I don't know. We're going to ask Whitney, who's producing this for us, to maybe take you off the screen at the moment, maybe reconnect with you because it's just not working. We're hearing very, very little of what you're actually saying, unfortunately. And it's too important to really skip over like that. So
It
let's
is.
reestablish that, Whitney, if we could.
Yeah.
Go ahead and disconnect with Brian, and we'll try to reconnect with him. Meantime, Jack, we can kind of just give people the little lay of the land that if they don't know. I reported on this morning on the radio side, and the Department of Energy. The Federal Department of Energy has agreed now with the FBI, which of course is a subset of the Department of Justice, in confirming that there are levels of confidence here that are reported. I don't know that they're necessarily extraordinarily important here, but 2 years ago, anybody who suggested publicly and out loud, particularly those in the Trump administration and from the Trump administration, who said that that the coronavirus that ended up spreading around the globe and killing maybe 6 million people and including 1 million here in the United States.
And Bob will never know that number, by the way, because we conflated the data from day one. But I digress.
Yes, that's no. Hey, you know what, Jack, shout that from the rooftops. That's extraordinarily important. Even the CDC has admitted that. Even the CDC has come out and said, we were reporting too many deaths with COVID as opposed to from COVID that we couldn't confirm, and they didn't explain that until 3 years on.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, and I'm sorry, but it's super important. We talked last week briefly about the groundbreaking report that Lisa Murtha released last week that talks about how the boosters are suppressing our body's immune response specifically to detecting cancers. And one of the things that they're seeing happen to cover over that is, again, they're conflating the data with the weekly report that the CDC puts out. So a lot of these people who are dying of COVID are actually dying of cancer. So
right.
They're still doing
There's a
it.
whole bunch of things involving women's menstrual cycles as well, not to mention pregnant women, and there's so many different things. But aside from that, let's try to steer back to the issue of the origin of it. If we would have said 2 years ago, and we did, that it didn't come from bat soup in some wet market in China or in Wuhan, to be precise, that it came from a lab, that they were literally engaging in gain-of-function research there, and either accidentally or intentionally, the virus that they created was released from that lab, we were the conspiracy theorists. We were the science deniers. We are the ones who said flat Earth. We are the ones who were racist too, racist and xenophobic. We wanted to harm Asians, all because of this whole thing. So now here we are, 2.5, almost 3 years. March 20th is when kind of things really hit the fan. So we're almost to 3 years later. The FBI, and the Department of Energy, through separate investigations and resourcing, have concluded, the FBI at what they're calling low level of confidence, their conclusion is lab leak. The Department of Energy, moderate level of confidence, lab leak. And that's the best you're going to get. Nobody is going to say high level of confidence, we know it, until they can actually find the documents that say this is what we're doing. And of course, those were all trashed what did Hillary use on her servers?
Server 30,000. Yeah.
They bleach
it's
bit
the digital
all
paper,
of that data.
Digital paper shredder is what I call it.
Yep.
And Bob, listen, I'm going to say this, and it's exorbitant, but I think it's important to remind everybody, it doesn't matter the degree of confidence, because here's the bottom line. On this information, you probably see it just like I do every day on your Twitter feed, every day on your Facebook page. People have been drunk on the Kool-Aid for so long, regardless of the information that comes out, their interpretation of what goes on is really going to depend on where they are in the political spectrum. Now, maybe there are some independents that in the middle that are going to consume this information and change their minds. But the bottom line is, whether it's high degree of confidence or low degree of confidence, there are people who say, I don't give a rip what you say. If you're involved in the executive branch, I don't believe anything that you say. And if you tell me it's a low degree of confidence, I'm going to assume it's a high degree of confidence. And I'm also going to probably pontificate that at some point down the road, your pals in the mainstream media and Joe Biden's time until he remembers the next line is going to come out and say, well, look at all the political pressure we're under now that the Republicans are in charge of the House. This is going to flip because of all the nobody believes a damn thing. And that's on Anthony Fauci. That's on Dr. Bruce Vanderhoff. That's on all the sympathizers that we're going to talk about right now with Brian Blackburn, who for 3 years have lied, half-truth, misrepresented, and grabbed onto a tragedy, didn't let it go to waste to gain more power and influence over the population. Brian Blackburn is back with us. Thank goodness. How are you? Can you hear us?
I can find now.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah, that's technical. Right? Hey,
All right.
Jack, I don't know what you're getting, but I can't hear him.
Okay, Brian. Brian, if you can, give us 20 seconds on the article that you republished today and your thoughts. We'll sample with that.
Yeah, sure. I'm publishing this stuff a while ago. I just got sick and tired of hearing speak on so many different directions, being in the political way. But in the last 12 months, we've been so many voices, even the administration in the good. And
we're not getting.
Brian,
we're
still not getting you clear, man. Doggone it.
Yeah,
and that's a doggone shame, because I really want our viewers to hear what you have to say. My suggestion, and we're just kind of going at this live, Bob. My suggestion.
Are you in a utility tunnel somewhere? I mean, that is about the worst connection I think I've ever heard on a podcast through a computer network. It's like he's in a tunnel somewhere with Tommy Lee Jones ready to jump. I don't know what it is, but it's really, really bad, and I want to hear this very badly too. I know that's why we had him on.
Well, Bob,
I don't
let's
know
pivot if you don't mind. Go ahead.
I don't mind pivoting either, but I just wanted to say this. We'll see if we can rescue this at all. If Whitney, if you want to try phone, if you want to try to get him to phone in and connect to the podcast, we can try it that way, just because his computer system was not cooperating, and that'll be the last chance of effort here tonight. And if not, we'll reschedule him for another night when we can have a better connection with him. So let's see if we can salvage it there. And while you work on that, Jack, go ahead and pivot where you want to pivot.
Well, I was just going to say we could cover a few tidbits from around the Buckeye State right now as we're sampling with Brian. I've got a couple of things. I don't know if you have anything on your punch list, but the first thing that I will talk about is the tragic death of Ohio State Representative Chris Jordan, who died over the weekend. He was 46 years old. Initial reports cite natural causes as the reason for his earthly and early passing, I'll say. And, the fact that his ex-wife, Melissa, and their 3 kids are still in mourning, I'm going to hold off on some very strong visceral responses that I have to things that I read on social media over the weekend that are absolutely disturbing and disgusting from people who are trying to grandstand while family members, friends, and colleagues are mourning State Representative Chris Jordan's death. So, rest well, Chris. It was an honor to know you, and I've always appreciated all the time and insight that you provided to me throughout many, many stories and newscasts. You'll be deeply missed.
Well, I'll just, I did not know Representative Jordan, Chris. I heard nothing but good things, which is a wonderful statement to his service to the state of Ohio during his time in office. And I also read some of the things you're talking about and people's attempts to politicize this. I can only say that according to those who knew him the very, very best, absolutely none of it is true. And that this was a natural, related to, a health condition, but it had nothing to do with the health condition that is being used to politicize and to find a way to, take away from the sadness and the mourning of the man's passing. Mm-hmm. I can just say that the people who knew him best are very upset, and they're absolutely debunking any of those tall tales and myths that some people are trying to associate with his death. So I will just join you in saying rest in peace to Chris, and of course to all of his family and friends. Our very best wishes and our prayers and thoughts are with you.
Amen. And we're going to try Brian here in just a moment, but I'm going to use this pause to say thank you to the Freedom Foundation and remind our listeners and our viewers to go to thefreedomfoundation.com and also recognize that they are the creators of optouttoday.com, and that tool is number one in freeing government employees from union bondage. And if you've read any of the stories that we've produced on the Ohio Press Network, you know what that looks like. You know where those union dollars go. And you also are aware that there are a few cases right now in the state of Ohio where union employees are suing because they've said, hey, I don't want money taken out of my paycheck anymore, and they continue to do it. So go to thefreedomfoundation.com, and if you're inclined to make a 501c3 tax-deductible donation, make sure that you put Talkin' Smack in the memo, and they'll double the amount that you've given. So thank you to the Freedom Foundation for being on board from day one and for all the work that you're doing.
Well, I'll echo that. Thank you so much to the Freedom Foundation. We have another guest that we're going to be getting to shortly, so let's make one more last-ditch effort here to get a few words in from our guest. See if we can reconnect now to Brian. Brian Blackburn, are you there?
Giving it a shot here, guys. Can you hear me at all? An echo chamber?
Still a little bit of a delay, unfortunately.
All right.
Yeah, it's delayed and it's choppy, unfortunately. So
Sorry about that.
We got to get him a new tin can and some better
Yeah,
strain.
no worries. Brian, we'll make some arrangements with you, off the line. What you have to say is super important. So, and I'd love to bring you back. I'm sorry that the technology didn't work tonight, man.
No problem, guys. Sorry about that.
Brian, thank you
worries.
for trying, man. We really appreciate your time. We will make this happen. I promise you.
We'll be back.
All right. Thank you. So Brian Blackburn unable to come with us here. But Jack, if you want to give a synopsis before we go to our next topic and our subject with Jonah, do you want to give a synopsis of what Brian, what led you to reaching out to Brian this particular moment to come on and talk with us?
Yeah, so there was a report, and frankly, he went deeper into the weeds than I did, and I didn't want to bastardize anything that he was going to cover. So, the treetops are that the Department of Energy was, commissioned to do some research along with the FBI to really figure out where did this virus come from. And what they landed on is that it was an accidental leakage from that Wuhan lab in China. And that's no surprise to anyone that's been reading between the lines and following the facts for the better part of 3 years on this matter. But as Bob, you said earlier, there's a low level of confidence in it. There are other executive departments who are saying we don't necessarily agree with that. But the Biden administration did ask agencies to look well into the matter. And I think this is really the first one that has come out with confidence and said, hey, even though it's a low level of confidence, this thing came from a lab and it was accidentally leaked. I think it's going to create some questions around was there illegal gain of function research going on? Dr. Anthony Fauci has been extremely covert in explaining what went on, how it went on, how it was funded, and I think he's going to have some explaining to do.
He has done more than been extremely covert. He's lied directly to Senator Rand Paul, among others. He's going to be called back before Senate committees, probably before House committees now that the Republicans are in charge there. And he's going to have to answer questions about gain of function research because there is myriad evidence that he and they and the NIH and elsewhere were indeed funding that gain of function research.
Yep.
He has talked about it. He has almost bragged about it until, of course, things went south with respect to the virus, the number of deaths, and obviously the horrifically muddled and mistaken reaction and actions taken as a response to it. So, it is extremely important that we get all of the details we can from everybody who's inside, everybody who's in the know about what was done there. Because, Jack, I interviewed Daniel Horowitz today. Daniel Horowitz co-wrote a book with Steve Deace called The Rise of the Fourth Reich.
Yep.
Why we need a return to the Nuremberg Code, which we have so dramatically departed from. in with respect to COVID. And those who don't know, the Nuremberg Code essentially was established after the Nuremberg trials after World War II, that essentially declared that no nation, nor any doctors with any support of any nation, shall experiment on human beings, shall experiment on them, use them as test subjects and so forth. And this, of course, goes back to the Nazis and the horrific things done there. And truthfully, it should go to the Pacific Theater as well and some of the horrific things that were done in the name of quote unquote medical science from the Japanese. But it basically said that, this is something, it's kind of like a Geneva Conventions. We all agree that there will be no more experimenting on populations or individuals. And that is exactly, as Steve Dace told me when I interviewed him a few months ago, he said, we violated every syllable of every word of every line of every paragraph of every page in the Nuremberg Code. That's what we did. And then I interviewed Daniel today, and I'll tell you what, Jack, if we aren't able to confirm and pin this entire thing on that lab leak and on that man-made or at least, tampered with gain-of-function research, which led to all of this, if we can't pin that and make sure that whoever is responsible is held accountable, and I'm talking about everybody from China to the United Nations to, yes, the United States, then it will happen again. And what they wrote about, the rise of the Fourth Reich and how we must make sure this never happens again. It will happen again. It is a virtual certainty.
Damn right it will.
And it's just there's nothing that could really be more important. And I don't want to go overly political here too, Jack, but I think we talked about this very briefly on a previous episode. I think we did anyway. But President Biden has members of the State Department negotiating with the United Nations and the World Health Organization to give full power to that global body to control what is done in member nations' countries, within their borders in the event of another global outbreak of whatever kind. Another global pandemic or health emergency that they will determine, by the way, whether it crosses that threshold. Then they will control the economies of each member nation, tell them what has to be shut down in order to stop the spread, slow the spread, blah, blah, blah. They'll tell people where they can go, when they can go there. Civil liberties will be suspended. It is so extraordinarily dangerous. And this is literally happening as we speak. Those negotiations are taking place with our State Department and other world leaders. So,
well, Bob, that shouldn't surprise anyone that lived in the state of Ohio. Surprisingly, at the time, had a Republican supermajority in the General Assembly and all the executive offices, including governor. And yet, we absolutely saw our civil liberties trampled. We saw the police come in and enforce rules that, by the way, there were reporters out there saying, hey, these rules aren't doing a lick of good. The masks aren't doing a lick of good. The social distancing isn't making a difference, and shutting schools down is going to hurt our kids. And we've already had a trial run, and we failed miserably as a population. So I look forward to reading that
the biggest difference there, though, Jack, is that when the police actions were taken against us from a tyrant in Ohio, which you just referred to, at least it was an Ohio tyrant. At least it was Mike DeWine, the governor of this state, and at least that was maybe acting on orders or advice or directives from the federal government and all of that kind of thing. What makes this so frightening, what I'm talking about, is that it won't be an American leader, it won't be a state leader, it will be an international body that will tell the United States, you no longer have your own liberties and your own sovereignty. We will tell you what to do because you signed on this agreement. You signed this treaty or whatever it is that we're calling it. So just beware.
Well, I think whether it's treaty or we bankrupt this country, which we do, and we get a massive loan from the European bankers that are controlling this whole deal anyway. You pick your poison. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But I don't want to delay anymore. Yes, we do. We have Jonah. Bob, why don't you introduce, because you've most recently talked to a really, really good man, somebody I'm excited to talk with.
Yeah, very much so. Good guy. Jonah Schulz is a former candidate for Congress. He is an activist, a conservative activist. He has got a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, and he is putting those to work both, literally in the streets and when it comes to the political sphere, but he's also putting it into a book. And his new book comes out in about 2 weeks on March 13th, if I'm not mistaken. Jonah can correct me if I'm wrong. It's called Common Sense for a Dying Nation. And that is something we desperately need, because that is something that we desperately are. We are a dying nation. And the question is how are we going to steer this thing back on track? So, Jonah Schulz, welcome to Talkin' Smack. Good to talk to you again, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thanks to you both for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, it's good to have you, and I'm glad to know your computer is working so that we don't have a
Amen.
repeat. Because we got to have at least one of our guests come through tonight on this thing nice, loud, and clear. Jonah, tell us about the book. First of all, the title, Dying Nation. Some might, I won't because I know what's going on, but some might say, well, that's pretty dramatic. We're not dying. I mean, yeah, we're a little divided, but we're not dying. Are we dying?
Well, let's look at our country right now. Our economy is shrinking. The American people are bringing home less and less, and groceries and common goods are more and more unaffordable. Our manufacturing has largely been shipped off to other countries. Our suicide rates, especially among children, are at record highs. Our depression rates are at record highs. Drug use, drug addiction, and overdose deaths are at record highs. We essentially have no border. We essentially have no common language any longer. Our culture is completely deteriorating. Our election system is suspect at best. If you take a 3,000-foot view of our country, it is showing the signs that every great empire shows right before the collapse. And we are in that very crucial moment where we have the fork in the road, where we're either going to continue on this decline with the people like Joe Biden, with the rhinos that we currently have. Unfortunately, the majority in most of our state houses and our United States Congress, or we are going to make a decisive move as the American people start taking more responsibility upon ourselves, like what was intended for us, and we're going to turn this around. And I use the term dying nation, not dead nation, because our nation is not dead. It is not even close to being dead. We, the people, still have a pulse, and as long as we have a pulse, it's not over yet. And that's what I'm trying to inspire people to understand, is that it is incumbent upon us. There's no knight in shining armor that's going to be coming over this hill to save us. If you want to save this country, you got to get on board, and you got to do the heavy lifting yourself, because there is no savior in the scenario until the end of times. This is on us right now.
Oftentimes when there are massive takeovers like this and seismic shifts in culture, there are linchpins. There are the few things that drive the massive outcomes. Based on your research, based on what you've written, based on what you've seen, Jonah, tell us, what are the 1 to 2 things? You said we're not dead, but we're dying. What are the 1 to 2 things that we can grab onto right now and use to get out of this mess?
Well, I think ultimately we need to turn to each other, and we need to turn to God. When you look at our founding, there is no America, there is no true sense of liberty without understanding first where our rights come from, that our rights come from a divine creator. They can't be handed down by Dr. Fauci. They can't be handed down by any government, any king, any man. These rights are internal, and they are inherent. And we have to have that return back to that true moral center that guides our universe, that guides right and wrong. And we have to have a return to the sense of community as well, because, one thing that's really gone wrong, that I think, in the conservative movement, is that we have gone to this idea of, every man for himself, just kind of stay out of my yard. I'm going to do my own thing. But the reality is, the true conservative wants to create a true society, a true community that seeks adventure, that seeks independence, but also loves and cares and shelters one another, right? That we turn to our neighbors, our churches, our communities before we turn to the government. And what gives me hope is, when I was running for Congress and I was meeting tons of people, is there are still amazing, great people out there who wish to live this way of life. So as long as those people are out there, there is hope for that. But we can't have any hope in any one issue unless we turn to each other and ultimately turn to God for guidance in this scenario. Because, again, liberty, the idea of inherent rights, of natural rights, is dependent on a larger than ourselves creator, right? Something that is much greater than ourselves. And if we have a return to that, you're seeing sparks of it like that around this country. You're seeing it in younger generations as well. I think that gives us hope for the future.
Jonah, how do we reach this younger generation? Gen Z is in an absolute disaster zone. They are surrounded by social media influencers and social media pressure that is applied. Instagram and internet. Sorry about that. They're raising our kids. Then they're going to schools and they're being confronted by teachers wearing rainbow badges saying, scan this QR code and I'll tell you how you can become something different than what you are. They're being told, wave that rainbow flag around, by the way, or else we're going to expose you as a bigot. We're going to ostracize you. You're going to lose all of your friends. You better be telling this person over here when they tell you to call them they or them, you better do it. Even though there's only one of them, and it goes against every English grammar rule that we've ever taught you about plurals and singular and possessive pronouns. Jonah, the kids are being run by something other than what they used to be run by, meaning educated by and given their values by. It used to be done by families with teachers who supported them by giving them the educational portion that they need. Now they're being indoctrinated everywhere they turn. So you've got the title, Common Sense for a Dying Nation. Okay, great. Give me some solutions. How do we save that generation, which ultimately is going to determine whether or not we save this country?
Right. To start with a speck of some good news, the Gen Z generation, which is, generation after mine, I'm at the tail end of the millennial generation. The conservatives in Gen Z are are increasingly conservative. They are more conservative than millennial conservatives, Gen X conservatives. So there is a trend to getting back to that actual conservative route, not just this kind of libertarian, do whatever you want, do what feels good kind of mentality. So that's encouraging. But you're right. We have social media. We have this total immersion of children into this leftist indoctrination complex. And so ultimately, if you read my book, if you ever hear me speak, the one thing that I am absolutely adamant about is you can forget anything if you're not willing to first talk about the increase that needs to take place in personal responsibility. So when you're talking about the kids, there is a huge amount of responsibility that needs to be taken on and needs to be taken back by the household, by the family, by the parents, right? We have 50% of kids growing up in single parent households, right? The family has been completely hollowed out. The average kid just doesn't have a mom and a dad and increasingly solid role models at home. And increasingly those people who would be those role models, those parents, they're off at work, right, all day, and you're getting raised in daycare by a stranger way too often. But to go back to solutions, when you go back to our education system, everything has to start at home. Everything has to be the parent taking responsibility to say, listen, no, I'm sorry, you can't be on social media when you're 8 years old. You can't have TikTok as a 10-year-old. You can't get sucked into this leftist indoctrination machine that's at play. So really everything that you look at, whether it's as an adult or as a parent, it is taking on that increased responsibility that's going to take to pull these kids out. It might even be homeschooling, right? And a lot of people will say, that's going to completely upend my lifestyle. And yes, that's true, but there's going to be a lot of changes that we're going to need to make that are going to upend our lifestyle if we're going to change this thing around, because our lifestyle is part of what's buried us in this grave to begin with.
Yeah, that's a compelling thing that you're saying. I know one of the things that Whitney and I have talked about with our kids is that we need to be more intentional in making sure that they're spending time with us and our extended family. When I was growing up, going to my grandparents on Sunday and having Sunday dinner was a rite of passage. I mean, you just did it and it was awesome. And you know what? We were all different. We got on each other's nerves. Your grandpa was cranky half the time, but we all went there. And, later on in life, we look back and it's like, man, I really missed that. So that's one of the things that we've started instituting in our family is, hey, we're going to be intentional about getting together with the extended family and making sure that we have those strong ties with people in our lives that can and should be our influencers instead of the education institution. One of my concerns, Jonah, and this is going to be my question, is that there's a lot of talk right now about parents' rights bills and making sure that parents know what's going on in schools. Well, my concern there is, well, they may know what's going on, but what if they don't? What if they disagree with it? And then the other one is kind of this backpack bill. Well, we'll just let you take your funding, from school A to school B. Well, if the apple's rotten, it doesn't matter where I take a bite of it from. So, I mean, is there a better solution to some of this watered down stuff? And at some point, do you think that legislators, someone's going to stand up and just say, look, you're not doing that here anymore?
Well, talking about this point and the previous point, I think one thing that's important to talk about is that whether it's in life, our relationships, our careers, or in politics, you get what you tolerate. And what we're seeing in our education system and our government at large is a result of the American people tolerating far too much. And we're seeing a huge pushback. Obviously, what have we seen over the past few years that's really been at the focal point of politics has been parents refusing to tolerate any longer, are pushing back, are getting a little bit mean, sometimes a little bit in the face because we can't be pushovers any longer. But when you're looking at from the legislative side, you're seeing in Florida and other places banning false teachings like critical race theory, teaching the absolutely twisted and perverted gender ideology. And I think when you're looking at conservative politics specifically, and again where we've gotten it wrong, is instead of what we need to do is assert things that are true and fight back against things that are false. We've kind of went to this middle ground where we've said we just want a free marketplace of ideas and open exchange. But when one side wants an open exchange of anything goes and the other side wants to completely dominate, who do you think is going to win? We need to fight for true things, for real education. And when you look at what books have been banned in our schools, right? You'll see the entire media, a huge backlash over banning pornography in our schools, but we've had the Bible banned in our schools for how long? And if there's not very many Republicans that would even stand up and say, hey, that's a book that should be in our schools. Kids should have the opportunity to read that and learn that as the most important book in world history. So it's really a changing of tone and ultimately saying we are going to wield power from a government end for good means. And I think we've gotten buried. Republicans have so often gotten buried in the idea of small government. What we really want is limited good government. We want the government to do things, good things, and discourage bad things. And instead, we've had this kind of leftist government complex, liberal government complex that has come in and forced their will. And when Republicans and semi-conservatives get in charge, they kind of just stall out. They say, we don't want the government to do anything. But you have to learn to fight back. You have to institute truth and goodness and beauty, or else the other side is going to win 10 times out of 10. And that's why we're in the situation we're in.
All right, Jonah. You want a limited government that does more good things and fewer bad things. Not asking too much, right? Except for the fact that half of this country thinks that bad things are good things. And the other side thinks the exact opposite. That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene says, you know what? The idea of fixing this broken and dying nation and keeping it together as it is now is a pipe dream. We are irreconcilably divided in this country right now. It's time for a national divorce. United Red States of America, United Blue States of America. You don't have to have a continuous border, but you will just be a part of whichever one that your state declares by vote, by popular vote, or by representative vote, or whatever. We need to separate because there's no way we're ever going to solve these. I don't like the idea of a national divorce. I don't like the idea of dividing up the greatest gift that has ever been gifted, which is this great republic from our founding fathers. But when I stop and think about it, this republic was formed as the product of what? Divorce. You know, we divorced ourselves from the tyrannical Brits. We told the English monarchy to kiss our rear ends. We're going to go and form our own country. We had to fight to get there. Divorces happen, and sometimes you're better off because of it. And I think while most people have excoriated Marjorie Taylor Greene for the suggestion, how dare you call for a civil war? We're not even talking about doing this with a war. It doesn't mean no bloodshed. Just votes in the parts of the country that feel like they want to be free and have, fossil fuels and abundant energy and a strong military and low taxes and actual borders and lower drugs and less crime and stronger police presence and all those things can do so. And the sides that want to power their entire country on solar panels and windmills and have no borders at all. People can come and go as they please and no police presence, but social workers instead, and no guns, ban guns, because nobody will ever have a gun if they ban guns. The other side that wants to do that can do that too. I got to tell you, man, I'm starting to think I want a divorce. What do you think, Jonah?
Well, I understand where the sentiment comes from. But ultimately, when you look at the feasibility, right, of a national separation, when you have states that are 55, 45%. You have purple states. You would be talking about the mass migration of tens of millions of people throughout the country if we're breaking this down on geographic lines. But the sentiment really is indicative of the time we're in, where we can't find any type of common ground because we're living in two different realities. Let's put it this way. If you're having a conversation with someone that believes that we should be able to take a healthy 8-year-old boy or girl and mutilate their genitals to affirm whatever type of gender they feel like that day, then I can tell you right now, I don't have anything in common with that person, most likely. And so how can I even start to have a conversation on more in-depth policy? But that being said, when you look at issues specifically like the radical gender ideology, those issues are not supported by 75% of Americans. They're just not. Even a huge percentage of Democrats do not support this radical gender stuff going on with kids. And so when you look at those numbers and you look at how the average American actually thinks, the average American is actually fairly conservative. I truly believe that 60 to 70% at their core, in their core beliefs, are more conservative than they vote. But the problem is we are less educated and engaged as a voting base than we ever have been before. And as a result, we have people voting for individuals like Joe Biden just because they were told to on CNN. And so the fact always comes down to we, the people, have checked out of the political process. We have to create a culture and a society that deserves to be free, that deserves to win these battles, and deserves to last long into the future without having these conversations of national divorce. But we've really dropped the ball as individuals. And I don't say this about anybody. I'm saying myself included. We've all been duped by candidates. We've all made bad choices. Sometimes we've checked out or, gone squish on our principles because we wanted that promotion or we didn't want our kid to get in trouble at school. But ultimately, this is it. If you want this country to stick together, if you want this country to be free long into the future, you have to take that next step as an individual, whether it's just getting more educated or whether it's getting involved in the political process. This is our time to shine as a people because we know the politicians are not coming to rescue us. But when it comes to our country, I don't want to see it torn apart. I understand where that sentiment comes from, but it comes from the fact that we have really evil people pushing really evil things. And we don't want to live in a country that pushes pornography in schools, tells kids that they can mutilate themselves, and that teaches people to hate each other based on the color of the skin. That's not the country I was born into, and I'm only 28 years old. And this is just the reality of how things rapidly are accelerating, but I believe it's pushed by a smaller political elite, and the people just have to wake up and smell the coffee.
He is Jonah Schulz. He is a former congressional candidate and author of Common Sense for a Dying Nation. Jonah, where can people pick up the book when it's out in March?
It is currently available for pre-order right now for signed copies at jonahDschultz.com. And it's going to be available on Amazon on March 13th. So be sure to check it out, leave reviews. It's a very concise read based off of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. And it will be something that I believe can really spark that light of liberty within you as it did myself.
Excellent. One other quick question. Are you going to run again?
Well, I'm very much about what God puts on my heart. Right now, I don't have any plans on running, certainly not in the next election cycle. But if God calls me to run and there's an opportunity to run, I'm not going to say no. So, I'm always open. I'm looking to wherever I can use my God-given talents and abilities to best serve this country and help my fellow man. And whether that's in politics or something else completely different, I'm open to where God's going to call me.
Outstanding. Well, doing it with the power of the pen. I love it.
Jonah, thank you, man, for coming on. As always, appreciate the chance to talk to you, bud.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it as well.
You got it.
Take care, brother.
Yeah, Jack, I thought about running once, but even the thought of it made me tired, so I grabbed a bag of chips and hit the couch instead. Running is very, very hard. Jack, to the point that Jonah wrapped on and that I kind of wrapped on with my question about the national divorce, I mean, I got to tell you, the next time I see, the bald dude with the beard and the big shoulders and a big old giant beer gut, And I say to the person next to me, that dude needs to hit the gym. And she looks at me and says, how dare you? You should be ashamed of yourself. He's pregnant. Then I know I can't be in that country anymore. I can't be around those people anymore, because that would be a female transitioner situation where she literally took testosterone and grew a beard. But as you know, any female who thinks she's a male still has her uterus and still has the ability to get pregnant. And if I'm supposed to accept a male as being pregnant and about to have a child, I'm on the highway, man, and I am on my way to a red state. I will fight. If I don't live in one, when the divorce happens, when the divided states become red and blue America, if I don't live in a red state, I will very shortly. Just a few. It's a one tank trip away, baby. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I talked about this concept a couple of years ago, and I don't know how you agree with things that are disagreeable and irreconcilable. There are just certain things that I will never be okay with. I will never be okay with a mom who's afraid that she's going to have anxiety killing a healthy child in her belly. I will never be okay with a biological male pretending to be a biological female and wanting to compete in sports and use changing rooms and restrooms. I just, will never be okay with calling things that aren't as if they are, and being alienated and isolated and called a bigot and called a racist because I, tend to have Judeo-Christian values and love a God that says, I am, and there's not one other than me. I don't know. There are certain things that you can negotiate on. There are certain things that are non-negotiable. And I think we're in this time right now where the line in the sand is drawn. And if you haven't thought about what those lines are for you, I would encourage you to think about those things and then figure out what you're going to do when that line's crossed, because believe you me, those lines will be crossed unless we had Vivek Ramaswamy on with us. He's talked a little bit in some ways, same vein as Jonah. We need to rediscover who we are as America, and we need to reignite that vision of what this country is and what it should be. Unless there is a massive resurgence of love for this country and the God that helped us found it, I don't know. I don't know how we reconcile, Bob. And I hear what you're saying, and I'm probably more on that team.
Yeah. And I hope it doesn't come to that, but I just fear that that's the path. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene took a lot of heat for it, still is, but she's just saying what a lot of us are thinking. So, hey, before we wrap, I want to say I apologize for the multiple kiss your ass temper tantrum kiss my ass rather temper tantrum that I threw at the Olentangy school district and school board. Well, wait a minute.
You're going
What's the
soft.
name of the show? What's the name of the show again?
It's Bob's Quilting, I guess. I don't know, man. You soft?
I'm setting it up here. Wait a minute. It's Talking Smack. I apologize for absolutely nothing. That was smack talk that was deserved, and I will echo it and I will repeat it. Any one of those child abusers and groomers at Olentangy or anywhere else wants to do this to kids, you're going to have to answer for yourselves. Ultimately to God, but before then, to guys like Jack and me. And we're still talking smack. I'm Bob.
And I'm Jack.
See you next time.